Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the City Council Scrutiny Committee. Item 1 is apologies. I've received apologies from Councillor Everett and Councillor Galvin, and I'd like to welcome Councillor Champion, who is here for Councillor Galvin. So welcome to your first scrutiny meeting. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from members on any items today? No, thank you. Item 3 is a series of minutes from the meetings held on the 12th of November, the 18th of November, the 16th of December, the 10th of January, the 20th of January, the 3rd of February and the 28th of February. So a bumper crop for me to sign. Does anyone have any comments on those? And if not, I'll say all those in favour, please indicate. Any against or abstentions? Against? No. Yeah, we had this issue at full council a couple of times ago when I wasn't at a meeting, and I felt I should abstain on the minutes because I couldn't speak to their accuracy. So we'll record an abstention for Councillor Champion, simply on the fact he can't speak to their accuracy. So thank you for that. Well, we're now on to item 4, which is a sustainable, inclusive Norwich economy following COVID-19. I'm delighted that Catherine Wadhams, the chair of the Norwich Good Economy Commission, is able to be with us today and present to us, so you're all very welcome. And Catherine will give a presentation outlining the work of the Commission, and after that there'll be an opportunity for committee members to ask you questions. Members, you'll also be able to ask questions of our officers we've got here who perhaps will speak from a more Norwich perspective, whereas Catherine can talk about the Commission. So we've got Ramona Herdman, Helen Chamberlain and Lisa Farrington, and Lisa, it's your first scrutiny committee, so welcome to you as well. Just also like to quickly remind members that we're unusually already in the election period, so if we can make sure that our questioning and any discussion takes that into account, that would be very helpful, thank you. Otherwise the monitoring officer will no doubt intervene and help us make sure we're on the right side of all the rules. So, without any further ado, over to you, Catherine, if you want to use the green button just to get the microphone on. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder, Chair, and thank you very much for your welcome. Really pleased to come and present the work of the Good Economy Commission to you. I've put up a slide, and thank you also to members who've helped prepare the material for the slides, but I put the slide up here just to show you that this is a commission which goes across different partners and different sectors, initiated by the Norwich City Council and the University of East Anglia, and really a forum for the community to address these issues in the city's economy, in particular looking at making Norwich as fair an economy as we can. We looked for sustainable and innovative projects backed by consistent research and evidence, and our mission was to, and I quote, explore how we can achieve an inclusive and sustainable economy that enriches all of our lives. So fairly ambitious in what we were hoping to do, and that set out our agenda for us. I'd like to give you a quick overview of what we've done. You've got a report which has been prepared by the team here at the City Council, and I'm very grateful for all of their support in this work, which has more details, but I'll just try and give you some of those headlines, and I'll look forward to the debate and the questions. Just a little bit about me. I'm a retired economist. I'm an economist who's retired from UEA. I think I'm still an economist. But I'm still active in research, particularly on fuel poverty and the vexed question of how retail energy markets work, or perhaps don't at the moment, but particularly in the distributional effects of changes in prices, changes in market rules and changes in regulation. And I've really enjoyed, and it's been a privilege to chair the Good Economy Commission in slightly unexpected circumstances. We planned to start, as many things did, in March 2020, and then something else happened, and so we didn't start till June 2020, and we didn't meet each other until November last year. But we did work through that against the unexpected background of COVID, first of all, and that had already brought together many of the actors who we had already brought together or had involved in the Commission. And of course, at the same time, also COVID exposed the challenges of inequality, which we already knew were here, but were exacerbated by that pandemic. We now have the cost of living issues, which are looming, and so the Commission is going to end in June 2022, a few months' time, in, again, a very different context to that we originally envisaged. So I think our focus now has got to be on curating what we've learnt, what the implications are in terms of what we've found out about the Norwich economy, and what legacy we'll leave. Sorry, I'm just enjoying one of these must work. There we go. I thought I should say a little bit about money. The Good Economy Commission has raised some funding from the Norfolk Strategic Fund and the Innovative Projects Fund, as you see, and the UEA and the City Council put in £10,000 each, and we spent the money on grants for research and for pilot projects, on staff costs to keep the Commission going, and on the project on diverse voices and communications, which you'll see in the slides here. We've also raised some other match funding which will enable some of the projects to go on beyond the end of the Commission itself, so that's very encouraging. So just to give you a taste of what we've been doing, there have been different work streams, and one is digital inclusion. That was addressed through 5 collaborative projects with other organisations, including, I think, the City Council. One on community skills, which focused particularly, we wanted to focus in one particular community, and we chose Mile Cross after looking at various indicators that should help us with that choice of an area that had some measures of deprivation. We had a project on good jobs, which I'll say a little bit more detail about, which talked not to employers, but to employees in frontline jobs, asking them what made a good job for them, wanting not to concentrate on better money and more security, which we kind of took as read, but beyond those things, what would they look for? And the project came up with this infographic, as you see, and based on, I don't know how easily you can read it, but based on respect, which is part of the basis, then 4 boosts that really mattered. So let me connect with the organisation and with the people who the employee is encountering in the frontline job. Care about my life, be aware of the kind of restrictions that there are on my own life and how I need to fit that in. Have my back. If you're in a frontline job, you're going to encounter people who are sometimes cross and sometimes abusive, and it was really important to people to feel that the employer would back them up when that happened and make me part of the conversation, include me in the planning. So I thought that was just a little taste of one of the details, and there's more details about the other streams in the report. Other work streams that we looked at, 2 which I would say were sector related. One on social enterprises, so that we were able fairly early on in the Commission to support a successful application for Norwich to become a social enterprise place. We're very pleased to have been able to help that. We didn't take the main initiative, it would be fair to say, and I think that's quite typical of the Commission's work, that we were there supporting ideas and initiatives that were already in place, but we, I think, made it happen sooner than it otherwise would have done by being able to support it. And there's been discussion around anchor institutions, a wish to explore whether there could be a network of anchor institutions for Norwich, looking particularly at the way that the HR function works and that procurement works, to make it better for the Norwich economy and for the workers who are in those anchor institutions. And again, it was something, I think, that there was a will for already. This has come later in the project, in the Commission's work. But I think, again, it's been there to help something that was underway, or there was a willingness to be underway anyway. We gave some grants to community groups, and they're listed in the report. Can say more about that if you want us to. And we've held a number of seminars, and they're listed here. I might point out one particular one, measuring progress, because I think that's going to be relevant to how do we know whether we're doing any good, how do we measure what the economy is what the Commission is doing. That's quite difficult, but we are at least exploring and have had some advice on how we measure the economy itself and the nature of the economy in a wider sense than just the financial sense. And then one thing that has run across the Commission is the diverse projects work stream. There's a board game called the New Horizon Experiment. I recommend it to you. You can build your own community with your own values. And I would typify it really as being a forum in which you can explore what your values are. And so because you're building this community, you have to make some decisions, how you're going to vote. Some of these decisions you already have imposed on you, of course, and in real life we're limited. But you have an opportunity to build something. What will you build? And so it's exploring priorities. And from that process, garnering what it is that people really value in the sort of community that they're building. And we had an exhibition at the Forum, I don't know if you had a chance to see that, a few weeks ago, called Open Doors, in which again we were inviting people to tell us what they thought a good economy would look like in Norwich, and really trying to listen to the voices that are not usually heard. And now the challenge is, of course, having tried to listen to them, what do we do? How do we hear it? How do we transfer that into action? Particularly as one theme that came out a lot is, okay, this is all lovely, now act, what are you going to do? And that in a sense is the challenge to the Commission to help other people to do that. I just think I've got this sorted and then it does something else. There we go. So we had a workshop last week in which we invited commissioners to discuss with us both what a long-term and short-term vision might be. I've put up here our Aunt Sally's, if you like, the suggestions we put to people, and there were, I don't think they're going to end up like this because there were quite a lot of comments. People engaged very enthusiastically with these, and I think probably wanted to be more ambitious, which was rather nice. Though we then have to work out what that means in practice, of course. And I think we're still likely to do this, there was some support for this, to have a pledge that organisations could sign up to. And here's a kind of draft pledge. This is the one we put out to start with as a basis for discussion. We're going to provide good jobs, we're going to use social enterprises when that's appropriate. We're going to support environmental aims. Environment came through as very important to what people thought a good economy would look like, both through our recruitment and purchasing. That's back to the anchor institutions ideas. We're going to consult relevant communities when we make big decisions, and that would vary. The community would vary according to the organisation concerned. And we're going to promote digital inclusion. And we took some of this to the City Vision 2040 meeting on Monday, and we had some really useful and encouraging comments, including perhaps the possibility, as also came out of the workshop, that we might encourage people to sign up at least to one or two of these, not to abandon the rest, but to prioritise some and perhaps to focus on some rather than others. So now we're in our final months. It's a good time to talk to you, I think. We're building on last week's workshop and our encouragement from the meeting on Monday. Reports are going on the NGEC website, and we're hoping to curate those to be a good resource for everybody in Norwich. We'll gather together the learning from all the projects. They all have reported duly by today, which was the deadline. And then we're going to be going back to commissioners to try and pin down a little bit more what input they and their organisations or their sector can commit to, and where they might take leadership, and where others might be involved as we go forward from the end of the commission. The Secretariat who are based here will draft the final report for agreement by the commissioners, and then we'll be looking for recommendations and commitments for action, both from the members of the commission and, as I say, beyond, including what momentum do we want this commission to have afterwards. How are we going to monitor it? Somebody suggested if people will sign up for the pledge, they could be encouraged to do an annual report. Very short, they said, a page or two, just to say, this is how we've addressed this pledge, this is the progress we've made. So the report will be published in June, and there'll be invitations for general response to that by January, and I think the City Council has already committed to responding by that date. So that's my quick run through. There are more details in the paper that you had before, and I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you for sending some of them through in advance.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for that very interesting overview of the work of the Commission. I'll throw this open to members now for any questions for Catherine following the report. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thank you for that, Catherine. That's very good, and I'm still reading some of your report as we go along. But just read down a few things about the Anglia institutions that seem to worry me. You talk about location and history and that, but in Norwich we have lost a lot of history in Norwich. Macintosh is disappearing, Coleman's now gone, shoes we used to do in Norwich years ago. Do you think that if we had a Norwich Good Economy Commission in those days, we could have tried to keep these industries in Norwich, or what good would you be if suddenly Norwich Union decided to up and disappear to London? What pressure could you actually say, stay, this is where you belong, and we need you in Norwich for a good economy? And do you think our economies will change completely the way we work?
I wouldn't like to forecast the future too much, but I'm sure there will be more change, and I'm sure there will be more challenge as well. Obviously, if big institutions leave, I guess the initial impact is going to be on jobs and employees, and that's a concern, and I think that is going to go on happening, but with luck we'll attract some people, as you say. We need to try and do that. It's interesting talking to representatives of the private sector about why would they get involved in this, and they talk a lot about recruitment. And I think the recruitment difficulties that all sectors are having at the moment is quite a good opportunity to say, look, we have values that go beyond just the financial bottom line. And young people particularly, but I think older people too, I hope, value an employer who is concerned about fairness, concerned about the environment, and that I think this can be used, people can use this sort of pledge, if you like, to say, this is the sort of employer we are, come and work with us, and that can help attract people and to retain them. And so employers who think they could do that might be attracted to a city where that was easy for them to do. So that would be my initial response, though I'm not trying to at all minimise the challenges that have either occurred or will occur.
Can I just ask one more, Chair? You were at the UEA for a long time, and I think it's a fantastic place to study in, and a lot of people actually stay in the local area when they leave UEA. There's a big percentage of people stay in the area. But do you think the jobs will be about for? Because I understand that when they leave, the skilled jobs are not here in Norwich. They end up working in Starbucks or Sainsbury's and taking the unskilled jobs, which, if you know what I mean, for the unskilled population of Norwich need to survive in Norwich, to get the diversity in Norwich. That seemed like a lot of these firms take the students because they've got qualifications and they're paying them nothing.
Well, I think, yes, I mean, there are different aspects to this. I absolutely recognise what you're saying. So one of the things that, not a concern to you, but one of the things that UEA gets measured on is, do its graduates do graduate jobs, or do they end up in jobs for which they don't need the qualifications? One problem with Norwich being popular is that a lot of our students do exactly what you say. They want to stay in Norwich and they're not taking graduate level jobs, and you know, we get marked down on the league tables as a result. So that's one perspective of the question that you ask. There's another one. I'm on the advisory board of the economics department at UEA, which actually wasn't the department I was in, although I'm an economist. It's a complicated process there. But a lot of those students, particularly the ones who are keen on financial services, don't want to stay in Norwich. They think all the really good jobs are in London. And so we have to do a little bit of education for some groups, while also trying to have graduate level jobs for those who do want to stay and who have the right sort of skills. Of course, that's the other problem, that we're matching not just students and levels with place, but also the right sort of skills. And I think we can just try and make this place as attractive as possible, both for the companies we want to attract and for the students or the workers who we want to be here.
I mean, the first Barclays Bank in the whole world was in Norwich.
Sorry?
The first Barclays Bank in the whole world was in Norwich.
Absolutely, a proud history and a proud future, I hope, as well, but a different one.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've seen Councillor Osborne indicate, don't know if any others, and Councillor Champion. I'm just going to jump into the question of my own, and actually building on the skills question. The pace of change is quite dramatic in a way now that perhaps it wasn't a generation or two ago, in terms of the ever-evolving nature of skills that are required. How well do you think employers in Norwich and employees in Norwich are geared up to adapt to that ever-changing skills requirement and embracing the sort of nature of lifelong learning?
I'm not an expert on the job market, I hasten to add. But I don't think either employers or employees in Norwich are any slower than anyone else to respond. I guess we're proud of our heritage, so perhaps we sometimes look back more than we should. But I think people are pretty responsive to changes as they happen. I like your question, and I think it suggests, because we're thinking about our legacy, it really suggests that we need to leave one that is itself very flexible to changes that we don't yet know about. So I think that's a really helpful way to think about, well, how will we hope that people will respond to our findings, and how can we provide something that will adapt to their adaptation as we go forward. I think, well, for me, one of the issues about adaptation which is important, is to know who's losing and who's gaining from those. And can we help the process by easing it, particularly for those who face a loss through the adaptation? So I'd be particularly interested to understand how the changes are going to impact different groups, both because we want to alleviate difficulties, but also because if we don't, then there may be barriers to that shifting. So I think it's understanding how people are impacted and then doing our very best to make sure that that impact doesn't slow down that process, which, as you say, is going to need to be faster, not slower.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I work in IT, and I'm particularly interested in the bits and the work you've done on digital inclusion and perhaps the barriers to making more use of digital tools, and Adam Clark's report on refurbishing the equipment. And I thought it's very interesting about how, with traditional jobs going, and are we making sure we're properly geared up to coming in with digital. So yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Osborne, you were next, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. It's been something I've followed with interest the whole way through. I've got a question, sort of building on what Councillor Tribe was saying about people staying in Norwich and the kinds of jobs that are available for people in Norwich. I guess one of the sort of paradoxes, you'll know much more about this than me, one of the paradoxes of trying to get sort of investment into Norwich, for example through the Towns deal funding and money like that, is that what I don't want to happen is for that to make Norwich an attractive place for people outside of Norwich who are already skilled and well paid to come into Norwich and get those jobs. I kind of want them to do that, but then for people in Norwich not to benefit from the jobs that are being created. So I guess there's a question of how has that been looked at, and what can we do about that? And the other question I had is about the anchor institutions. Are we looking at procurement spend and how much of that stays within the local area? Because I think that's what Preston did. And my third question is on the links with the Climate Commission that's now been established, and whether this will now feed into the Climate Commission, or whether there'll be ongoing sort of collaboration with them.
Thank you. Interesting, your first question about people coming in from outside. I think we have to be a bit careful about not putting up the barriers. It's going to sound like Brexit if we're not careful. In the sense that although we want the people in Norwich to benefit, it's not clear that they won't benefit if others come in. So we would want, I think, to have the best person, we probably legally have to have the best person for the job. I think what we'd want to be careful of is that people in Norwich didn't have a disadvantage. And I guess I'm slightly back to understanding previous question, are there some barriers for some people who we could help? So I think it's a question of removing any barriers that we see, rather than trying to restrict in some ways. It's a loosening rather than a tightening, if you know what I mean. And skilled people who come in from elsewhere do bring their money and spend it and create more jobs. And so there's always that effect as well. So I don't think we'd want a thriving economy to be a very open one in terms of attracting people in, but making sure that local people were not in any way disadvantaged in that. So I think that would be my main response to that. Anchor institutions, yes, exactly, looking at how procurement is undertaken. Particularly the tradition is that big institutions will put out, big tenders, invite people to bid for a large block of supply, and explore in particular whether perhaps packaging those tenders in different ways can again reduce some barriers that local companies might have, and particularly social enterprises. Again, I think we have to be careful that we're not putting barriers up to this group. We're just saying we want a level playing field, and understanding what that level playing field means to people who are used to producing smaller amounts, and social enterprises who are producing for different purposes. We're exploring at the moment potential links with the Climate Commission, and I think there's a willingness by people in the Commission to take on board that. One of their criteria is that change happens fairly, and I'm personally really interested in climate justice in an internal, a local sense, a national sense, as well as an international sense, so that we understand, again, who is bearing the brunt, who is paying for changes to improve climate or to mitigate climate change. And are we supporting them adequately in that, or are we just saying, well, rich people can afford to buy things that will help the climate and poor people can just pay more? So, that's obviously a caricature. But I think there are important links, and I very much hope that those links will emerge and be consolidated.
Thank you. And yes, your response to the first question sort of frames it, I guess, in a more helpful way. I guess where I'm coming at from that question is all the money, so levelling up money, obviously we're not getting enough of that in the East anyway, but levelling up money and towns deal money and so on. My concern is that the greatest need is not necessarily for levelling up between regions, but within the region, and making sure that it's actually people who need support are getting that, or need levelling up are getting that. I guess that's the question, and whether the Good Economy Commission has been looking at whether that investment in Norwich is actually delivering that. I think that was actually something that a former officer said to me here. But the other question on the climate is on looking at, is there work being done looking at cost of living and retrofit? Because that seems to be the big barrier at the moment, is the lack of skills for people to carry out retrofit and insulation work, as well as the lack of investment in it. And I'm wondering if there's going to be any concrete recommendations from the Good Economy Commission or elsewhere on that, because the local enterprise partnership isn't interested. The county council is starting to look at it now. The city council is starting to look at it, or is looking at it. But there needs to be some kind of local leadership on skills training for retrofit and coordination of investment. I'm wondering if the Good Economy Commission could play a role in that or advise on that.
So to answer your second question first, no, we haven't looked at that at all. It's not been part of our remit. In another life, I'm in the process of applying for a UK Energy Research Council grant that would look not so much at, I think you're talking about, are the skills there to actually do the retrofitting. And I know that there are huge shortages across the country to actually do these things that people want to do, and in some cases have the money to do. We're actually looking again at the distributional issues. Do people have access to finance to actually do it? And if you're in rented accommodation, what does that do, and so on. But that's a national thing, not a local thing. In terms of local levelling up, and is the money going to the bits of Norwich, if you like, that need it most? I guess, we haven't looked at that, but I guess there are some limits in terms of the strings that are attached to any money that comes. But beyond that, then presumably this group and the local community has some power, or the city council and the local community have some power to influence where that money goes. And that's a great bit of local levelling up, as you say, which is really important. And I suppose it's that difference between the wealth and the income of different places in Norwich, which really lay behind the initiation of the Good Economy Commission.
Is that something that Scrutiny could look at in future?
Potentially, we can, when we discuss the work programme, we can flag that up along with the dates, and you can think about that. Okay, well, thank you for that. Next question was Councillor Champion. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting to hear what you've had to say and to read through your report. I would be interested, we've had a few references to history. Obviously, throughout history, there has been significant changes in the requirements of employees to be able to adapt to their environment through the first, second, third industrial revolutions. As we approach the fourth industrial revolution, which is where we are right now, the employment is going to decline significantly over the coming decade. Is that a reasonable statement?
Well, any expert will say, not my area, which I will say. It looks like that, doesn't it? But haven't we thought we knew before what was going to happen to employment, and it didn't quite work out that way? So I wouldn't want to bet money on it, but...
Well, I guess my first question is whether the fourth industrial revolution and the requirements of individuals to diversify their income so that we're not reliant on large employees employing lots of people to perpetuate the traditional idea of economy, which seems to be the state of play. We seem to believe that the future will look like the past, and that we'll get big employees and they'll employ lots of people, and then everyone everything will just be rosy. But I've read a lot of reports which indicate the opposite of this, that actually large corporations don't need so many people, and that therefore there won't be so many employees, and that will have a knock-on effect on the wider economy. And so I guess my primary question is whether this has been a consideration of your research in any way, shape or form.
We haven't really tried to look at how the labour market might change. So no is the short answer to what you're saying. You talk about employment from big employers declining, but of course we might have different sorts of employment. So we know, for example, there'll be social enterprises, there might be smaller employers. We have a lot of self-employed people in Norwich, an unusually large number, I think, and there may be new forms of work and employment in the future, but we haven't tried to forecast those, but it's something else we need to be ready to adapt to, I think, and be ready to recognise how people need help to adapt to that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Vaughn Thomas next, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your report. Very interesting, I have to say. But I'm a bit confused when we talk about Norwich employees. Given what we've all been through this last couple of years, myself included, working remotely, I was talking to a sales director in the City of London last week who interviewed and took on a new sales manager who lives in Norwich. Previously worked for a firm in Manchester. So, you know, I think it is an issue of place, making Norwich even more attractive a place to be and competing against those companies in the centre of London. But in terms of benefit, how you assess that, I mean, it's about people. I mean, we know about the differences between those people who live in Norwich and those on the outside who are getting the better jobs. And we do want a high-skilled economy. But is that an economy here, or is it an economy in the City of London? The work environment has changed. It's changed radically and rapidly. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to second guess it 2 years ago. But it is a different one. And we're using old metrics to assess it on attracting new employers to come in and to Norwich. Do big new employers need to come in to replace the shoe industry or the chocolate factory? There are different ways of approaching it. It's just a comment, really, but it just adds to my confusion, let's say.
No, I think it's a really good point. And when we talk about Norwich people, who do we mean? Do we mean the people who are employed here, who may, under an old system, drive out somewhere else to actually live and spend their money? Or do we mean the people who live here? And I've always tried to be a bit vague on that, which, you know, it doesn't help anybody's confusion, probably. But I think we need to distinguish as well that there are some sectors which are important to Norwich, particularly retail, which is undergoing a huge change, of course, but also the hospitality and tourism industry, which can't really move somewhere else. They do have to be located in the place. So perhaps what we need to do is divide our minds so that we're thinking about some things that need to be rooted in a place because of the nature of the work, and how are they're going to change too, but how are they going to change? And then differently about those jobs that are not located in a particular place, and what are the implications for the well-being of Norwich, whether that's people who are employed here or people who live here, and what we need for the interaction between these two groups for the whole economy to thrive. So I think we probably have to do some more sitting down with cold towels on our heads to really understand that, and to again follow the changes, because as soon as we understand it, it'll change again. It's not static. It's not that, oh gosh, I can understand this and I've got it. It's going to go on changing. So it's being responsive to those changes. And I agree the boundaries are not as nice, clear cut as they used to be.
Thank you very much for that. I've got Councillor Giles next, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for your report, Catherine. It's much appreciated. I was going to follow up on a couple of things. Firstly, with regards to the online seminar that took place on green jobs for Norwich, and what ideas came out from that of how Norwich could be, encourage an incubator for a cluster for green jobs of the future in Norwich to make our employment sector more sustainable. And the second question I was going to ask was with regards to the skills strand of the Good Economy Commission and the work that's been done in Mile Cross. What were the biggest skills gaps that were identified in that community, and which skills gaps have been filled by the work that's been done? Thank you.
So on the green jobs for Norwich, I don't have any more details, I'm afraid, that I can help you with. The slides from the seminar should be on the website, so that's a place to explore them further, but that doesn't tell you more than happened in the seminar itself. On the skills work, community work in Mile Cross, the response, we've only just got the responses, so this is rather off the top of my head, and I haven't read them in the detail that some other people have, so I don't know whether other colleagues will want to add anything. Not surprisingly, I think one of the things that we found was that there wasn't a lack of, not a lack of skills, but there wasn't a lack of people offering help in Mile Cross. What we thought we found was, and perhaps this isn't surprising either, it's coordination that could be improved. People didn't always know what other people were doing, even when they were doing rather similar things, trying to help the same community. And there was perhaps a slight tendency that Mile Cross was the flavour of the month, and several different groups would arrive trying to offer help. So I think out of that experience, we may be looking in particular to see whether there are some lessons to be learned for coordination. One of the projects was looking particularly at governance, and governance of, for example, a local initiative, or a trust, for example, a trust that was delivering benefits to the local community, and how to get local people involved in that process of governance, which is familiar perhaps to many of us in this room, people who are used to working in these kind of areas, but is a little strange, perhaps in some communities. And that turned out to be not an easy issue to resolve. So I think we've learnt quite a lot about the challenges, and we work on from there to see, well, how might these challenges be addressed once the Commission has finished. So it doesn't quite answer your question about skills precisely, but about the process by which we might try and support skills in a particular area. The other thing that we need to do is work out how much what we've learned is specific to Mile Cross, and how much would be applicable to other areas as well, because the projects we've done because we want to learn from them. I don't know whether colleagues have anything to add on that.
I'm afraid the Green Jobs seminar was before my time, but we can definitely take that away and kind of provide some more information. And similarly on the Mile Cross skills projects, we are just getting the reports in, so we haven't analysed them yet. But there was a range of things. So there was some work done around parents and well-being, which I think is a sign of how broad the Commission was, really. Not everything was about being an employee or an employer. A lot of it was about how do people participate in the economy as a wider kind of community? How do we, so the game that Catherine was talking about. it asks questions about how do we look after people who are ill in our community. It doesn't necessarily put everything in sort of financial terms. So there was that. There was some stuff looking at women's skills and the barriers to the sorts of opportunities women in Mile Cross wanted. There was the governance of community centres stuff. And this is actually one of the projects where we've managed to get some extended funding for somebody to work as in a sort of community connector role in Mile Cross, and particularly around kind of offline sharing of opportunities around skills, which sort of links across to the digital inclusion strand as well. That actually, sometimes for various reasons, things are not accessible to people, and if we can kind of go to where people are and listen to them, we might get a bit further. I think the diverse voices work that Catherine was talking about as well, quite a lot of people talked about how they wanted to be, they felt that sometimes to participate in the economy you had to fit into a certain box, and they really wanted employers again, but people generally to recognise the skills and experience that people had in a broader sense, rather than, you know, expecting people to all come along looking the same and being able to tick the same boxes. So we will be analysing all that over the weeks to come for the final report.
Thank you very much for that. Apologies, Councillor Waters, I didn't welcome you when you arrived, but thank you for joining us. I know you've been at another meeting. So was there anything you wanted to sort of say in relation to this paper before I bring the next set of members in to ask their questions?
I could say one or two things. I'm sorry to join you late, Catherine, and sorry to be here late at a previous county leaders meeting, which ran for 2 hours. So pleased to be here in the calm of Scrutiny Committee after that meeting. I did go along to that Green Jobs seminar, which is a while back now. But the one thing I just recall from it is we sometimes see green jobs as something that we need to kind of create, as it were, from a start point. But actually, if you green an organisation, so for example, take Aviva, which are doing some really significant work around their sort of green sustainability credentials, by a process of iteration, jobs which weren't green become green because the organisation has been able to change itself, transform itself in a way that hits those criteria. So I think that's another dimension to the green jobs discussion as part of moving that agenda forward, which I think is a very sort of positive thing. But that's the one thing I remember from that particular seminar. But there'll be other useful thoughts there. It's been a delight, I have to say, to be a commissioner on the Good Economy Commission, and to be very ably led by Catherine, who's chaired those meetings very skillfully, and I think brought out the best and brought out the salient questions, and the team that have worked alongside Catherine. Some great work done by a number of people from different parts of the organisation, City Council, but also obviously partners from different sectors. And I think there have been some significant achievements en route. The last meeting we had, and Catherine may have mentioned this, what next? Is this the end of the process? Well, I think we felt very much in the context of being a kind of start-up commission. We'd got to the point at which we had some research, we had some community voices, which I think is the most radical part of this. We often think about what we think a good economy should look like for other people, but actually we need to listen to what people are saying about their experience of the economy and what they would like to see improved. I think it's strongly influenced and added value to the living wage work we're doing. There was some very good research about what does good work look like, and being paid a living wage is not necessarily an automatic precondition to sort of employment happiness, because you can be paid a decent wage and have a dysfunctional organisation for which you work, or you don't get the recognition of that wraparound package of things which makes you a productive, happy and creative worker. And that is something which is about every type of work. There's there's a sort of a broad sort of canvas that encompasses all types of work and all work is of value. So I think people who we talk to as part of the Commission's work would be disappointed if we'd heard those voices and then we somehow didn't carry that work forward. So I think that's particularly important. And for us as a council, it's about social investment, our investment in people, a lot of discussion, a lot of initiatives around sort of hard infrastructure, economic investment. Actually, it's about the vital role of people and their capacity, and the element around this in relation to the work of the Commission, but the cost of living crisis, and what needs to be done there. What people need, I think, in our society is a system of flexi-security. The economy is a dynamic thing. There are a lot of changes. There needs to be put in place a framework where, whether people are in work or out of the job market or in a situation where they're, at some distance from that actually have got enough to live on and enough to have opportunities within the economy to make a contribution, rather than a parsimonious, punitive model of welfare, which looks more like the new poor law than a post-war welfare state, which was the ambition with Beveridge, full employment in a free society. And I guess if we're to crystallise it, if we can do more work around living up to those principles, then I think we're on the right path.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Waters. We'll go back to the questions now. I've got Councillor Driver next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's on a bit you touched on, a bit about tourism. I think Norwich has got a lot to offer with tourism and the wider area in Norfolk with the Broads and the coast and North Norfolk and Yarmouth and other places like that. Do you think we should put more resources into tourism as we go on? And also, it's how do we get people to know where Norwich is? I mean, when we were growing up donkeys years ago, everyone knew roughly where Norwich was because of Norwich Union, and they used to sponsor all the major athletic events. There used to be Norwich Union everywhere. Where now is Aviva, and that's just, where the hell's Aviva? I never heard of that, So I think that was a big mistake, and really is a great shame for Norwich that they got rid of their name. My other worry is, and we know they bring a lot of money into Norwich and to Norfolk as well, if Norwich City actually get demoted from the Premiership this year, and how much difference that will make to the economy. So if you know how to get 3 points at Brighton on Saturday, I'd be much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Councillor Driver. I'll just say I appreciate, as an Everton fan, your use of the word if Norwich get demoted there. So thank you on behalf of us, Norwich City Football Club. Catherine, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, afraid I can't do anything about the football. Before we came to Norwich, we lived in Leicester. I lived in Leicester for 30 years. And we noticed at the university there that the applications did vary according to the fortunes of the City Football Club. It was before their rather surprise win. Anyway. Should there be more investment in tourism? We haven't looked at that in detail, and I don't have any insight into that. We know that it's important, and I like the way that you locate Norwich in its environment. Of course, we're not, although nobody knows where we are, we're not divorced from everything else. I like the person who said, well, Norwich isn't the end of the world, but you can see the end of the world from there, which is one of its delights. Does it matter? Well, perhaps it doesn't matter so much if nobody knows where Norwich is, if, as the councillor behind you mentioned, jobs are not so place located. So in some sense, we just want people to feel warm and fuzzy about it if what they're doing is generating goodness for Norwich from somewhere else. So that actual knowing where it is might become less important. But I know that that the city has its own programmes for publicising Norwich in the right places, and I've always been quite impressed by those, but it's not something, I'm afraid, that the Commission itself has done very much on, or that I can really add a great deal on. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Councillor Viv Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question was more about the grants to community groups, but that's been touched upon, so I don't know if that could be expanded. And my second point was the issue of graduates living here and working in London. And I think maybe with the cost of living increasing, that will become probably more of an issue, because people will seek to maximise their finances. And pre-pandemic, the travel costs would have been prohibitive for a lot of people, because they would have been expected to travel in 5 days a week or find somewhere to rent for maybe the week, Monday to Friday. But now, after the pandemic, companies are prepared to accept people going in maybe one time or 2 times per week. So that makes it much more financially attractive. So I see that maybe people, graduate skilled people, will look to do that even more. The salaries at the level in London and the living costs of living somewhere like Norwich. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before you answer, if I can just say, actually, Councillor Thomas, I think that's a point that resonates with me as someone who graduated in the late 90s and then commuted to London every day. When broadband finally came to Norwich in the early 2000s, I was then able to work from home 3 days a week, 2 days a week, whilst going into London 3 days a week. And so I think that will have only amplified. But Catherine.
Yes, I wasn't sure if you were worried about that. It seemed to me quite a good development that people could be more flexible about what they were doing, and in particular, I guess with a sort of financial economic type hat on, if people are getting money from London and coming and spending it in Norwich and enjoying the facilities here, and we're providing those facilities, that seems to me a good thing, but I may have missed something in your concern. I wasn't sure what else you were interested in with the community groups. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
No, I think that's probably been touched on, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I've got Councillor Osborne next, and then just so that everyone knows who I've seen, I've got Osborne, Carlo, Stootley and Champion's hand has just gone up again. So, Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you, and I will have a few more questions, but just on the green jobs event that Councillor Giles asked about, I also attended that, and one of the things that was discussed there again was retrofitting, and I think one of the things that, picking up what Alan said about the greening of existing jobs, was about the construction sector and green construction, and also training people to work in retrofitting as well. And there was also talk about refinancing models, so that because the money's not coming from government for retrofitting, whether there's ways that public and private public and private sector can partner together to get money invested in retrofitting. But I don't know if anything's come of that. Again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier about nobody seems to be really taking a lead on this at a local or national level. Sorry?
We'll make the point, and then I'll bring Councillor Walton who wants to make another point, but I'm obviously just conscious that if Councillor Walton is suggesting there's a political point there about it not being dealt with at a local level. But
I mean at county level, but fine. Sorry, misworded perhaps, but and I'm talking about skills training, as I say. Sorry, that's what was I saying? Well, my other question was, I'm going to phrase this sort of slightly provocatively. I don't really mean it like this, but what I've seen since I've been a councillor is there's a lot of projects in Milecross, and that always seems to be the go-to place for community and sort of social inclusion projects, which, good, of support that. As a Mancroft councillor, how can we get some of that in my ward? And you know, why Mile Cross? I don't know if Mile Cross councillors want to talk about that as well. But what is the attraction of Mile Cross, and what are the benefits? And is there plans to then expand that elsewhere in the city?
Well, I can answer the question about why we chose Mile Cross. We looked at the areas, the three areas, which I think includes Mancroft actually, with the highest or lowest, whatever, deprivation scores. Of course, these things are always a simplification. We looked, one of the interns from UEA spent some time mapping different measures onto different parts of Norwich. We looked at where there had been help before. I think the choice of Mile Cross was, it was an interesting combination. We didn't have very much money to spend. It wasn't a big project. It was an exploratory project. So we needed to find a ward which would have some ability to help us in delivering what we were doing. So, and this often happens. I mean, in my area, in fuel poverty, for example, people often go to help those who you can pull out of fuel poverty, but then that leaves people who are in deeper fuel poverty. So I don't think quite that was what we were doing, but we were trying to be realistic about what a small project, in a small exploratory project in a fairly small overall commission could achieve. I don't think we looked at enormous detail at Mancroft, so I don't think there was, I don't think we rejected you in a sense, but looking at the wards where there seemed to be most need, this seemed to be where we might achieve most. And I think we've learned quite a lot, which is applicable to other wards. It was a pilot project, it wasn't a huge spend of money, so I don't think you need feel very worried. And in some senses, perhaps those other wards who can use the learning do even better, because somebody else has to do the learning, and then that learning can be spread. And we're very keen that all our projects do have learning for elsewhere in the city and perhaps beyond. So I don't know if that helps answer that one. Have I forgotten to answer something?
If I can just follow up on that, I guess the question is then, how does that learning then get implemented? And if there is going to be expansion of the pilot schemes, how do we know about it and input into it as ward councillors, I guess?
Well, the commission comes to an end, so we will not be implementing things. We'll be talking to other people about how the learning can be used in decisions that are made across the different sectors that we've talked about. There was something you asked about, which was public-private partnerships, which I've written down but then forgot to answer. And I think we need to find a new way as a country of public-private partnerships. And partly because of the poor arrangements that were made sometimes in the past, we need to learn from those lessons and find a way in which, I mean, my own sort of very personal response would be that a small amount of public money could be a base for a large private investment. But then you have to be very careful about how you're dividing the benefits and who gets charged what. So I think it's not an easy solution, but I think it's an important one to find. Sadly, I don't have a blueprint to present you now, sorry.
I think that discussion came specifically after looking at what they did in Bristol, the Bristol City Lead project. So yeah, I don't really, it's not really a question, I guess I'm sort of putting it out there.
I think
perhaps it's worth saying we have looked at various other local things. Somebody mentioned Preston earlier. So one of the things we've tried to do is learn from other places. Of course, everywhere has a slightly different environment, and so the solution is likely to be slightly different as well.
Sorry.
Won't surprise you, I'm coming in on the general point about sharing learning rather than the more specialised point. So this is something that we really need to concentrate on now for the last few months of the Good Economy Commission. So as Catherine was saying, we are getting in reports now from all the different community grants and the pieces of research that we've funded, which are being put on the website as they come in. And then we will be pulling together a kind of master report that brings out the key learning and suggests a way forward, as Catherine was saying. And I think the really key thing for us is then how is that useful to people, how is that accessible to people? So that's something that we really need to be concentrating on over the weeks to come, so that the work that has gone on over the last 2 years is useful to people. So I think we don't have an exact answer yet, but those are the sorts of principles that we will be thinking about. How do we make stuff accessible? How do we communicate it in a way that is as useful for as many people in Norwich as possible?
Thank you for that. Councillor Carlo, next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine. I've really welcomed the Commission's focus on the informal economy, and as Councillor Walters has said, on a focus on people as opposed to the traditional hard infrastructure approach. And I always think of Norwich as being full of enterprising, independent people doing lots of interesting things. And so that fits very much into the informal economy. And we need to be enterprising and innovative if we're going to deal with the climate emergency and transform to a green economy. So I was very interested in reading the Thriving Places Index for Norwich. And it scored well on some criteria, but it scored poorly on local business in relation to the ratio of enterprise to local units. And I wondered if that was because it was a sort of traditional way of measuring enterprise, or whether, in fact, the informal economy falls below that sort of indicator level of measuring enterprise. And how you think that we might encourage more local enterprise so that we can transition to a green economy. And whether you think that in having a more flexi type of economy, as Councillor Walters has mentioned, we need something like a universal basic income to be able to support people in their enterprising endeavours. And I suppose then related to that is one of the three questions that the Commission poses. How can we intervene most effectively? And I suppose I'm asking, how can we encourage enterprise and innovation in Norwich to transition to the green economy? And then finally I wanted to ask whether you think there's a role and funding for a permanent Norwich Good Economy Commission, because obviously the Commission is in the process of coming up with a lot of useful, valuable lessons, and it would be a pity just to have them on the web and sitting on the shelf and not to be put into practice and to help us evolve our local economy. Thank you, Catherine.
Well, thank you. Perhaps I can start at the end. I was always keen that the Commission died after 2 years. When I was in university administration, I used to be very reluctant to ever create a committee, but I would create a working party, because working parties die and committees have to be killed, and it's quite difficult to kill them sometimes. And I saw the Commission as a working party in that context. It had a time-limited job to try and explore some issues, to experiment with some issues, and to produce some findings. So I think if we weren't ending, we probably would be less focused on the things that Ramona's talked about in terms of the learning and where does this go next. And there's a sense in which the Commission is about a community doing something, and as long as the Commission does it, the community perhaps won't get so involved. So I think we need to sort of get it out there. I really hope that the sort of things we've been doing will go on being done, but on a much bigger scale, and that there will be an awareness of this. Perhaps we'll report every so often to the Vision 2040 group to see how it's going, but it really is time for the baby to either, well, perhaps die. It's either dying or growing up. I'm not quite sure which, but it's changing anyway. So, and I think that's quite important for us as well to know that it's changing. Should there be universal basic income? I used to be very much against this, and I think I've now changed to be in favour, but that's only because the alternative is so awful at the moment. Whether that's, would that, I mean, in terms of human dignity, there's an awful lot to be said, I think, for such a system, though measuring it in purely economic terms, I think the jury is still out on its benefits. But it's not something that we're likely to be able to do on our own in Norwich, unless there's some other funding for it. So I think it's a question of seeing what tools are available and exploring with other people. You know, there may be tools that we don't know about that could be used, and I hope people will use their imagination to see how things can be achieved in that way. How do we encourage more local enterprise? I think networks like, is it the Norfolk Network, is that what it's called, of businesses, is one important group, which is self-help group in a sense. I think, again, it's listening probably. That's something we've learned through this project. You don't always hear the things you expect to hear. So do we listen enough to what it is that enterprises, the enterprising people of Norwich, would like to do? What's stopping them doing it? And is it something we can help with? Or is it something that we need to ask somebody else to help with? So I think it's really categorising things at this stage to see what the possibilities are and what the barriers are, and then how those might be addressed. That's a rather top-level answer to some quite detailed questions, but I think that's the best approach.
Councillor Waters.
Just to respond to one question Denise asked, which was about SMEs and climate change mitigation. I think that was an aspect of your question, wasn't it?
Yes, in relation to innovation.
Yeah, innovation. So Chris Sargerson, Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce, is doing some work with businesses in this area about climate change and business. And he spoke to us at a meeting we had on Monday, and actually in the SME sector there'll be obviously notable exceptions. There's not a very significant level of awareness in this area, so one of his tasks is, because the SME sector is really very important in Norwich, one of his tasks is to sort of ramp that up and get some engagement. And you can understand that small businesses, COVID and just managing and the challenges that smaller businesses face, that's not been perhaps a priority. I'm only speculating here, but that is something that does need to be addressed seriously.
I think the BID is also doing some work in the same area, Business Improvement District, and certainly the work that I've done on why SMEs don't switch to cheaper energy suppliers in those halcyon days when you could actually get a cheaper deal by doing that. And it's exactly the same, I think, as stops them taking many steps towards net zero. Is awareness is clearly crucial, but also do they have the time to really explore? And one of the projects that we did was, what are the barriers to SMEs adopting a net zero pathway? And very often it is the time and the kind of headspace of the small number of people who are involved in the enterprise. So I think all this work will be helpful in trying to provide assistance to such people so that they can indeed move in that direction without the barriers that are currently there. Thank you.
Just on that, there are so many things that need doing, and there are so many brilliant ideas out there. Really, reading, for example, 39 Ways to Save the Planet and sort of books of that ilk. There are just so many fantastic projects, and so it would just be wonderful to see them happening. Individuals coming forward in Norwich, and I wondered to what extent is that happening. I see it at a sort of quite a low level, and people who are very inspiring, but having projects which can actually take us a step forward to dealing with the climate emergency would be wonderful. We've got the Enterprise Centre at UEA, and it would just be excellent to see all the projects that are happening locally, to see them brought in one place, maybe in a website, positive stories that are happening in Norwich. I'm sure they probably are happening. I'm not necessarily aware of them.
Perhaps this is something for the Climate Commission to really celebrate what's happening and provide exemplars and make other people feel, well, this is within my reach, and here's a template I could use. So.
Thank you for that. So we have Councillor Stuteley next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the advantage of going last is that most of your questions get answered along the way. But I will just make a comment, and I think one thing that emerged from the pandemic is that all jobs are skilled jobs. They just have different requirements. But that's a comment. The question I have is about I'll just find it in the documents. That is about the gendered economy. Wondered if you could expand on the findings about investigating economic impact of the pandemic on women, findings from that, and any recommendations that the council can make, please.
So again, this is a fairly recent report, but I read the executive summary, so I can tell you something about it. I guess one of the main findings from that was a little disappointing in the sense that a lot of the key sectors in which, for example, the LEP wishes to invest are sectors which women are not highly represented in. And so there was a concern that women might get left behind because of this focus on construction, agriculture, and sectors where women were not so well represented. Of course, one response to that is to try and increase the representation of women in those sectors. I noticed that in finance, there are more women than men, and this is one of the key areas for investment by the LEP. But in most of the others, they are a minority. And so that was the main, to me, headline finding of that particular response, particular study. And of course, we know it's the same in Norwich as elsewhere, that women were more severely affected by COVID in various dimensions than men were. On average, of course, we're always talking on average. And so I think what one often needs to have is not only that overview, so that it's sort of almost call to look what's going on here, but also to understand exactly why that's happening. And again, the reasons, and if we know the reasons, then I think we can do a little bit more about trying to make sure that things are fairer, whatever that is, which doesn't necessarily mean the most obvious will push women into this area, or will try and wouldn't want to be restricting access of men to work in particular areas. Don't think that's the appropriate way forward. But that was one of the main findings of that output.
Thank you very much for that. I've got Councillor Champion next, please.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, I was curious about the diverse voices. You said you were listening to voices not normally heard. I was particularly interested, considering that we're discussing employment, I was curious about neurodivergent people. As a neurodivergent person myself, today I was very pleased to read about how LinkedIn has made dyslexic thinking an official skill, which is a significant change from when I was a young man. And with the recent cuts across the board in relation to SEM provision, and the fact that there's going to be a lot of people with neurodivergence who have not got the appropriate skills necessarily to enter the workforce, are they some of the voices which you have approached? Have they been included in this research? Are they some of the voices not normally heard?
They probably are. I don't know that we've targeted particularly neurodiverse voices, but I suspect we have heard some through the mechanism of being in particular places and listening in particular ways. I don't think we've identified it as a particular marker, unless other people are going to contradict me on that. In terms of have we intentionally gone to that particular group, I think the answer is no. But in being open to a wide range of voices, I suspect they have contributed. Neurodiverse voices have contributed among them. I don't think, as I say, we have specifically analysed that aspect.
Ramona.
I was just going to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I will go back and check, because I think that workstream spoke to so many different groups that we just gave an example of a few of the groups in the paper. And I think certainly our intention was to be as inclusive as possible. So I would hope that either we spoke to particular representative groups or that the groups that we spoke to were inclusive of neurodivergent people. But I can check that and get back to you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Vaughn Thomas, next please.
Thank you for that. I'd just like to refer to the a living wage economy, and don't quote me on this, no minute it. Perhaps we should be thanking P&O for what they've done, because now they're propelled to start paying the living wage, albeit the minimum living, what they call the minimum living wage, not the real living wage, to seafarers who are coming into British ports. It's as if we need that catastrophe to propel it forward. Similarly, I mean, these are rampant capitalists we're talking about, similar to the invasion of Ukraine. It's not an ideological thing anymore. We're not talking about the Soviet Union, but now we're actually looking at the money laundering in the City of London and tax havens. This catastrophe has propelled that forward. So, do you think there's an opportunity or potential, given what's happening with the level of energy costs? And I've been involved in energy efficiency. This was going back 30, 35 years, and we're still talking about the same thing. I mean, we're here, a room full of reasonable people. We're not the problem, actually, believe it or not. It's the people who are unreasonable out there. So is this an opportunity to address energy efficiency, retrofitting, or however you want to look at it? And I was certainly involved in retrofitting and training people to do that back in the 1990s, but we're still talking about it. So is this an opportunity to present it to the public, to local authorities, to national government, to force national energy companies to become energy service companies rather than just energy suppliers? Switch and save, quite frankly, doesn't cut it. We need people to use less energy. So I wonder, on that model, if you like, not that I wish a catastrophe on anyone, we could actually use that in terms of pushing for the good economy, not just for Norwich, but for the whole of the UK.
I'm not sure the Norwich Good Economy Commission has much to say on that, but I have quite a lot to say on that as an economist. Clearly the incentives are there now in a way that maybe they weren't so much a few years ago to save energy because the price has gone up. And I think it is a real opportunity, and I think it really underlines the costs, or some of the costs of getting to net zero. It's going to be a costly process, and I think too little attention has been paid to what those costs are and where they're going to land. So I think it does underline that, unfortunately, by putting vulnerable people in a very distressed situation. But I think the policy response should be not, well, let's cut the price, let's protect you from the price, but let's help you respond to the price, because that will help us on our pathway to net zero, and it is an opportunity. Like you, I recognise these arguments having been around. I started my research, this is very embarrassing really, on gas prices, retail gas prices, in the 60s, only just 3 months of the 60s, but it's a long time ago. And the issues, many of the issues they've changed, of course. And I think you're right to say that when we get a big shock, then that does enable people to see things in a new way. I think COVID was one of those shocks to society, and we were horrified, for example, at the differential death rates. But they were nothing new. Those had always been there, and we've now seemed to have forgotten about them again. So I think it's both capitalising on the catastrophe, but also trying to embed that message somewhere so that when we recover or adjust to the catastrophe, we don't lose the benefit that you're talking about.
Thank you very much for that, and certainly very timely given what's happening tomorrow, that we're talking about the costs that are likely to come through in terms of energy. I'm conscious that Catherine has been answering our questions and presenting to us now for coming up to an hour and a half, so I'd like to draw the questioning to an end fairly soon so we can move on to some, that has of course prompted a number of hands to go up. So Councillor Osborne, you're first, then Councillor Carlo.
Question. Or two quick questions, hopefully. One on the cost of living crisis. Has the Good Economy Commission sort of changed its work at all in relation to the cost of living crisis, or is there sort of, obviously it's hitting now, is there something that has sort of emerged from that can be taken forward after the Commission closes in June? And my other question is there anything that you'd do differently if this happened, if there was a commission set up again, or something in future? Is there something anything that you do differently that we can sort of learn from, I guess? I mean, not have a pandemic, but not that the pandemic helped, I guess.
Yes, I think that was my first answer, not to try and start as a pandemic is just breaking out. That would be good. But in a sense, that sort of flippant answer, if the Commission was, there are two responses, aren't there, to your second question. One is, would we have done something different in 2020 with the benefit of hindsight? And I don't think we would, apart from avoid the pandemic. Would a new commission, or would a body that was picking up our work, would it do things differently? I hope it would, because otherwise we haven't contributed anything. But I think we probably have to wait till we've digested everything we've got to know exactly how we would say, you know, if there were a successor commission, this is what we would pass on to you. We haven't specifically looked at the cost of living crisis. It wasn't there when we started. But I don't think it would have made any difference, because that's the context in which our findings land. I think it, you know, going back to the previous question really, I think it makes more acute the difficulties we're finding, or the challenges that we're finding, but hopefully it also makes more relevant what we are finding out. It's not specific to particular how our price is going up, but the general pressure makes the work of the Commission, I think, more relevant and more urgent.
Thank you for that. Councillor Carlo.
Thank you. Yes, returning to the Thriving Places Index, Norwich scores very badly on mental health, and also doesn't score very well on physical health, and mental and physical health in Norwich come up time and time again in different arenas. And obviously it impacts on the economy in terms of people finding work or keeping their jobs. And I wondered if you had the Commission has any particular recommendations to make in terms of supporting those facets of Norwich and maybe different health agencies working together with employers and business community to try to address those impacts and make Norwich less vulnerable. Thank you.
So, I think the idea of sectors working together is very central to the Commission's ideal. We didn't have health represented directly in the Commission, but I think I'd be extremely surprised if our recommendations don't include issues that are relevant to the health sector. And in a sense, I think our idea of a good economy, a place where people thrive, actually that includes their mental and physical health directly. It's not just it affects whether they can work or their income. It affects them, and I think we would see that as central to a good economy would enable people to thrive. And we do know that financial stress and other sorts of stress, of course, are contributory factors to mental illness. And so I would hope that this could be a virtuous circle that could be built, and one of the areas that would be improved by implementing the sorts of recommendations that come out. And again, going back to the cross-sector nature of it, this isn't something to land on the City Council's desk or on County Council's desk or on any particular desk, but it's really how we as a community respond to these challenges. And I think that has a huge amount to do with mental health and probably with physical health as well. So it's a really welcome area to be exploring further, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Viv Thomas.
Chair, it is a quick point. I do recognise the benefits of people who are employed outside of the city if they're then spending their income locally. But I suppose my concern was the issue that if a company was to move into Norwich and occupy a building, it's not just the graduate level and the management, it's the layers of employment that go to keep that building running, i.e. admin, maintenance, security. So it's the loss of those varying roles that we're losing out of. Thank you.
Yes, no, that makes your earlier comment very clear. Though I suspect now that there are the sort of people, if people are working in London, say going 1 day a week, there may be rather less of that building, because that kind of physical bricks and mortar office there'll be fewer of those around, I think, as we've discussed earlier on. But yes, I agree with you. It's not just the spend, it's also the associated employment that goes with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much to everyone for their questions. Now we come to the point in the meeting where we might put together some recommendations. So if anyone has any recommendations that we might have based on what we've heard so far about the work of the Commission and things that perhaps we could recommend to Cabinet to take forward. There's part of me that almost thinks where we're at the moment is that we're within a few months of the report being finalised, and whether there's actually an opportunity to see the finished product before then making a recommendation, maybe considering this again in the next civic year, to make a recommendation for the Cabinet to then put forward some comments by, I think, is it January 2023 when the comments need to be in? So I'd be interested in comments from the committee on whether that is an approach. If I bring Graham in first, then I bring in Councillor Stutley.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just make a couple of general comments, because I had the pleasure of attending the City Vision Board on Monday, where you had a similar debate, and I think the conclusion of it, that the general City Vision Board, notwithstanding the task and finished nature of the work that you've done, which needs to be concluded because we don't have the finance to effectively carry on with the structure, but certainly there was a further ongoing discussion with the Townsdale Board, sorry, not the Townsdale Board, with the City Vision Board, getting my boards confused, about effectively how we go about mainstreaming it, and that debate will take a little while to filter on, but clearly what the good economy Commission has done is shine a light on certain things, and certainly how we then carry on working with our partners to more mainstream that activity so we can avoid some of the possible pitfalls of the past and other areas, I think is a really important topic that isn't going to be resolved overnight, and we will have to come back to. Just some of the other comments I'd make about what I'd heard is that there's a wealth of information that's being produced now, and I think some of that will be really quite important in shaping future activities anyway. So members may well be aware we've got opportunities to bid coming up for further funds through, firstly, the Levelling Up Fund, secondly, the Shared Prosperity Fund, difference between the two being capital and revenue split. So some of the thinking in the work that the Good Economy Commission has done may be quite influential in terms of influencing how those bids that we're going to have to prepare are going to be targeted, and some of their work actually will provide useful evidence to actually support those bids going forward. And a similar situation, members will be aware that through Cabinet we've recently endorsed an updated economic development strategy, and that contains a commitment to producing an action plan, and also through the work of the Good Economy Commission, it's quite timely to influence that. So certainly through our own activities as a council, there's quite a number of routes where the work that has been done and the increased evidence base can be taken on board quite readily and influencing future work that we do as a council. But I think the main interest and challenge that comes out of it is how you effectively mainstream that activity through the work of the City Vision Board to mean that it isn't constantly some Cinderella that is overlooked, and our view of the economy is not just where we are in terms of GDP, it's working together to collectively deliver a form of growth that actually benefits people far more and does more to assist people getting far more beneficial life outcomes, rather than simply pounds and pence as bottom line as measured by some of the historic indicators we've done. So I do apologise, I have to leave, but I don't know if you found that helpful.
No, thank you very much for that, Graham. Councillor Stugley, I think you...
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to make the same suggestion as you made yourself, that it doesn't seem appropriate to make specific recommendations from this committee today before we hear the recommendations from the report, of which there appears to be quite a lot more that we can read as it comes in and goes online. Therefore, I was going to suggest that we come back with recommendations in another committee, but we could make a general reference to it for Cabinet to consider. I don't know if there's any wording we can come up with for that, but yeah, that was my suggestion.
I haven't looked at, presumably it is on a Cabinet forward programme to look at some point. Broad nods.
It will be. We obviously only publish the formal sort of decision plans 28 days in advance, but actually it is factored into some of our planning for next year.
I mean, just for the purposes of today, it may be possible to resolve to, thank Catherine for her work presentation and answering our questions today, but also the work of the commissioners in putting together what is a very comprehensive piece of work. And I'm sure the whole committee looks forward to seeing the finished product to inform future discussions. So are people happy that we have a sort of formal resolution on that basis? Yeah, Councillor Osborne.
Let me just ask a question / point. Obviously, we talked a bit about the cost of living and retrofitting, and I wonder if it's worth having a response from Cabinet on some of the things that were talked about in the Green Jobs seminar on retrofitting, and it's not maybe slightly tangential to what the Good Economy Commission itself has done, but I think it's a really important thing, whether we can have ask that as a recommendation to Cabinet. Maybe we can't from that committee, but I just kind of want to make that point as well. So
just what would we be asking, just so I'm very clear, so so the committee's clear on what we'll be asking, specifically asking Cabinet to do there?
To look at the skills gap on retrofitting. I guess that's together with county, and obviously we are due a retrofitting strategy, and there is going to be work on a retrofit task force as a result of the motion last month and already ongoing. But I think it would be helpful to have an sort of update on that, and because this is an issue that's happening now, and it would be good to know what's being looked at. And I don't know whether that's something that is done from an officer point of view, or whether it's more of a political thing. I don't want to sort of put extra work on officers, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, do you have a sort of view on?
I wonder, given the council meeting recently considered the motion on this, whether it's perhaps more appropriate to ask that particularly the skills gap issue is considered as part of bringing forward that same work, whether it's that Cabinet then decides that's an issue to cover as part of the terms of reference in the task force when that comes forward, as opposed to specifically a more considered piece of work now, because obviously it would take some work to look into that topic in detail.
Councillor Osborne, how does that sit with you as a way forward?
Yes, yes, that makes sense. I guess I sort of want to know what the council is looking at, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that comes to scrutiny as well.
Well, I mean, we will, in a couple of items' time, we'll move on to how we're going to approach the work programme. So are we happy that we can draw a line under this now? And thank you, Catherine. You've helped us immensely, I think. So thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you very much both for your attention and for your questions, and I think they'll all help to improve the report. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And thank you to the team who've done so much work.
Thank you. Well, we will we'll let you leave. We'll now move on. We've got a few more items to do on our meeting today. So thank you. So let me just scroll back up to the agenda. So item 5 is a verbal report from the Council's representative of the Norfolk Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Stewart, did you have a brief verbal report for us?
Thank you. Yes, I do. I'll keep it quite brief because I recognise the warning we were given at the beginning from the monitoring officer about how to report or how to frame things. So I'll just I'll tell members what we discussed at the meeting, and then I'll take any questions if there are any. I think that's probably the best way to go. So we talked about, in one item was the access to local NHS primary care for patients who are British Sign Language users. Another main item was access to GP primary care in Norfolk and Waveney for all users. And the final item was access to NHS dentistry in Norfolk and Waveney. Members will not be surprised to hear that there are major problems with all three of those items. So I can take questions. I think perhaps in future, because it's some time ago now since the committee, I think perhaps in future I should probably write a report to come to a committee rather than a verbal report, especially if there's a long gap between meetings. Obviously this one was cancelled, but if there are any questions, I'll try to remember the topic of conversation in those items.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Driver had his hand up.
Yeah, just one thing, on dentists, is there a shortage of dentists, or shortage of money, or shortage of practice that don't want to take on anyone else?
Yes, there is a shortage of dentists. I think one of the conclusions was for a number of reasons dentists have either left the country or the profession, and there are not enough newly qualified dentists coming through, and at the same time they are less inclined to take NHS patients. The dentists themselves were there was some debate actually about how the system works, because the dentists themselves were saying that you can get access to emergency care by using the 111 system, but there was a number of anecdotal responses to suggest that is not the case, and I know that myself. So dentistry in Norfolk and Waveney is in a serious situation.
Thank you, Councillor Driver.
Can I just come back on? Is there anything about bringing in private insurance to get in first, if you know what I mean? Some opticians are now chucking all the NHS ones out, but you can take the insurance out and you get seen. Is there any of that in the practices?
This wasn't discussed in the meeting, but I understand there are private insurance products available for people to sort of essentially pay monthly for their overall care on a private basis, but it's still going to be outside of affordability for a lot of people. That's my view. That wasn't discussed in the meeting itself. Councillor Osborne.
Councillor Osborne, you had a question?
Yeah, just to ask whether this is a Norfolk and Waveney specific issue, or whether it's worse in Norfolk and Waveney. We had a whole discussion at County Scrutiny yesterday about mental health services for children and young people in Norfolk and Waveney, and it was very difficult actually to get any answers on baseline of that, like how Norfolk compares to elsewhere. They just weren't able to give that data, so I'm wondering.
Yes, well, likewise, you know how these committees work on county. Sometimes it is frustrating, but I understand that Norfolk and Waveney is in a particularly bad situation, partly because of its geography, and therefore attracting dentists to Norfolk is one of the problems that was discussed at this meeting. I think one of the recommendations that was taken forward was, I'm not quite sure how they hope to achieve this, but to recommend that a dentist training facility is brought to Norfolk one way or another. And that was one of the recommendations that came out of it. I mean, clearly that would be a good plan.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, because I'd say dentistry is not just about teeth, but this time last year, I had a friend who was trying to get on the lung transplant register, and to get on, or to be considered for that lung transplant, you have to have good oral hygiene. So you have to have had dental work done. So it's not just actually about, well, I need a filling, so I've got a bit of pain. It's at the heart of everything that you're sort of trying to do in terms of promoting good health. So anyway, that's sort of got a tangent there. Councillor Viv Thomas, please.
Yeah, I can add to that actually. I'm a member of I've been a part of a dental practice here for quite a few years, and since the pandemic, unfortunately, I've needed quite a lot of dental treatment, and the waiting times have been just horrendous. And like the person that you've referred to, I have to have good dental treatment before I have treatment at the N&N, and that's impacted. And something I should have had done 18 months ago, I'll be having it done this summer because of the huge wait between dental treatment.
Yeah, thank you for that. There is a massive knock-on. I think based on some of the social media stuff I saw ahead of that NHOS meeting, it did seem that dentistry was, I don't know whether it's how it played out in the meeting, but the access to dentists, was that the bigger item on the agenda? It certainly felt that way looking at it ahead of time.
When it came third, but it was by no means least. I think, especially the responses that we had from the clinicians and the members as well. The stories that they were telling about their members of the public. So yeah, I mean, we've all got our own issues with this, and we know plenty of people in my ward come to us and say if there's anything you can do about dentistry, that would resolve almost all the problems that they have. So, thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that report, and it obviously prompted a number of questions here, so thank you for that. Item 6 is the report from the County Community Safety Partnership Scrutiny Sub-Panel. Councillor Giles has circulated a report already on that, so just really, are there any questions for Councillor Giles on that? No? Oh, thank you. Did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to apologise for not getting my written report to Lucy and Emma in advance of these papers being published. I'm conscious most of you have had it via email. I'm conscious Gary wouldn't have done, probably. Has he had? He has, has he? Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, any questions I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Councillor Carlo.
Apologies, Adam, I haven't seen your report. But I wanted to ask a question, and I don't know if it is relevant. I'm sure you'll tell me if it isn't. But in relation to community safety, as you know, county members get £10,000 per member per annum for spending on road safety, small road safety things. And in Norwich, we have so many issues in our wards, as you know, and the 10,000 doesn't go anywhere at all. And I don't know if there's any way that the City Council can impress upon the county how difficult it is, that it's not possible to manage to deal with all small traffic issues in our wards, often safety issues, on £10,000 a year. But ironically, a number of the county members don't actually spend their full 10,000, so at least the money ought to be recirculated to the city. But I do feel now that the city is really hard done by in terms of the loss of the Highways Agency and the impact on small safety measures. And I don't know if this can be conveyed in the strongest of terms to the county. Maybe a letter from the city would be very helpful.
Councillor Giles, I wonder if you can comment in terms of the scope of the committee.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, highways issues in terms of community safety aren't included within the Norfolk County-wide Community Safety Plan from 2021 to 24. That's not one of the priority areas. I think that's probably, and I'm looking at Ian here, it's probably better directed at the committee that Ian and Mike Stonnard serve on. I understand, you know, obviously has an impact on community safety, but it's not something that's in the community safety plan, unfortunately.
May I come in? Yeah. Well, I think the £10,000 budget actually has gone up recently. So if we ask for more, I had in mind that it was 6,000 previously, but maybe I had. So if we went back and if we recommended that we should have more, they'll say you've just had a huge increase, so it's unlikely to happen. But certainly, I think the solution to the transport problems that we have in Norwich is for Norwich to have control of what happens to transport in Norwich rather than rural county councillors.
Thank you.
Just on that, I did ask a question about this topic at the County Council on Monday, so I'm going to very much, of course they all agreed. No, they got a very, very non-response from Councillor Wilby. But,
Thank you for that. So item 7, which is our last item today, is to discuss the work programme and how that will work for the next civic year. So the proposal is that topic forms will be circulated and to come back in by the 17th of May. And then we will have an informal meeting on the 26th of May where we will discuss those forms that have come in and really I think an opportunity to have a sort of greater discussion of them. We will then have a formal meeting on the 9th of June where we will actually formally set the work programme, and I hope also at that point to be able to get an update from Councillor Stuteley on the progress of the fly tipping and communal bins task and finish group. I think Councillor Driver was there first and then Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, have we got anything outstanding on the work programme which will come up in the next year's programme? And what kind of time have we got left to suggest what we want to put in for next year?
So in terms of time for what you want to go in next year, you've got about 6 weeks, because you've got till the 17th of May.
I mean, how much time have we got for next year's programme? I mean, it's already full.
No, there's nothing. So
There's nothing in there.
nothing. So one of the things about scrutiny is that we forget what we knew. When we finish this meeting today, we forget everything that went before. I remember there's an episode of, I'm obsessed with Yes Minister, there's an episode of Yes Minister where Sir Humphrey's sitting on a report, but the government's changed, so he just buried it, and the new minister can't know anything about it. And that's kind of the way scrutiny works. So there's slightly, I make mirth of it, sorry, but it is that. So next year's committee is not bound by anything that the previous committee has said or done. So it's a blank slate, putting aside some of the standing items around the budget and the corporate plan and equalities that come to us every year. But broadly, it's a blank slate. So what we're looking for, I think, is topic forms that reflect some of the council's corporate priorities and what can be done to make some good recommendations for Cabinet to take those forward. Leah, did you want to come in on anything?
Just building on that, it's actually quite a good opportunity as well for members when you're thinking about what you might want to consider, how that might be done as well. So, for example, if you think that a meeting of the Scrutiny Committee just won't cover the services topic, do we want to set up another task group? I'm trying to remember, we have a specific name for them at the council.
Select committees.
Select committees, thank you, Chair. So would that be a way forward? Are there witnesses we might want to hear of? Would we, now we're able to go back out of this room, out of the virtual setting, are there visits we might want to do as a committee? So I do think about that as well, and also be thinking about how that links back ultimately to what are the council's corporate aims and what we're trying to achieve through the plan that we've agreed.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne.
Yes, a couple of things. First, there was a suggestion, I think it was agreed actually, to invite UK 100 to one of the Scrutiny Committee meetings, and that didn't happen for some reason. So I wonder if we can invite them, because that, just picking up what he said about things got missed off. And the other thing is the task and finish group, the bins, flight being one. I mean, assuming that will carry over, is there any report, any update? I hope it will carry over, because scrutiny won't be the same if there isn't consideration of fly tipping, given that it's been on the work programme for 3 years. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes, I will be putting myself forward for scrutiny next year so that we can finish this project. So the current plan is that we didn't want to have a consultation that was too short or one that ran through into the election period. So the public consultation will begin immediately after the election period, and we want that to run for a good period of time before it stops and then comes back to scrutiny. So originally we were talking about having a four-week consultation and for it to come back to the June Scrutiny Committee. I still think that will actually be a little too tight, especially to write a report. I would like to propose that we have our final, and it will be final by then, report to the full Scrutiny Committee in July. So I would like to know what other members think, and especially Councillor Osborne.
Thank you for that.
It would mean that we could run the consultation for longer and analyse the data for longer, and therefore come up with a better set of recommendations, or certainly a complete and fully considered set of recommendations.
I mean, having said all that I said to Councillor Driver about it being a blank slate at the start of the civic year, clearly there are some things where we hope that there won't be a blank slate, and we will have an opportunity to. Yeah. Councillor Osborne, did you want to come back on that? I think purely from we can discuss this when we talked about the work programme in May. I think we'd kind of hoped that it might come in June simply because it's almost something that is potentially oven ready at that point, and given the tight timescale between something being formally suggested on May the 26th and then that meeting. But I mean, if I also understand the logic about delaying it ever so slightly after that to get the consultation done.
I mean, it wouldn't be the fly tipping task and finish group if there wasn't a delay. But yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Suitley has said there. I don't know what to say really. Really, I mean, yeah, this has been going on for such a long time. I would like to see sight of those recommendations and the data and the report. I'd like for the task and finish group members to have some input into that, and I don't feel like we have so far. So.
Yes, well, okay, just for clarity, I've not been asked by officers to delay it another month. It's my suggestion so that we can make sure that there is enough time, because if we have a 4-week, I believe with the programme we've got, the council meetings that we've got set ahead of us, if we have a 4-week consultation, there'll be just around a week for the report to be finalised. I don't think that's going to be enough, given that we've had so many delays and problems. And if there's an issue ongoing at that time, we definitely won't have that. And it's we can talk about task and finish groups separately, but if we do have another task and finish group in the future, we have to absolutely make sure that there is resources available, because clearly there wasn't this time. That's why we've had the delays. What clearly we need to do with this as we finish it off, fantastic, as we get into the crux of it, essentially, is to ensure that those of us, we meet as a group and discuss it with some detail, actually, rather than leaving it to officers entirely. So I agree with Councillor Osborne. We need to have a look at it as a group. You have had sight of the draft report, and I don't think it's changed since then. So members have seen the draft report. We discussed it some months ago now, and the next part of the report will be written as a result of the results from the consultation that come back to us, and members will have an opportunity to look at that consultation, the consultation questions that were put to the public, and basically sign them off as a group rather than just me or just officers.
Thank you for that. I don't want to have a too long a discussion about the task and finish group. I've got Councillor Carlo and Councillor Giles, who both indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask Ian, please, what form the public consultation will take, just because I'm going to a West Pottergate residents meeting on next week, and that'll be one of the things they'll ask about and be interested in taking part in. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the consultation will be citywide, not just for Mancroft. So so we will have there'll be a series of questions relating to the major items that have been brought up by members of the public and the task and finish group. And I think there is a set of 11 recommendations in the draft report. It's not been published yet, but there are 11 recommendations in that, and I think the questions will be based around those recommendations. It's a data gathering exercise with a view to improving the service.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Giles.
I was just going to say I am of the opinion that these matters are better dealt with by the main committee, the full committee and committee meetings, because I think, time and again these have gone awry, these task and finish groups, and the thing with dealing with things through the main committees is all members of the committee then get an input, and B, we've all got these dates scheduled in our diary, both as members and as officers, so it provides that focus of, you know, we must do this by X date, and we're all here gathered in the same place at the same time. Otherwise, you've got a group of council jobs, different commitments, and pinning down exact times when all the members and all the officers are free at the same time can be very difficult, and they just drag on and on and on. And we've found this with multiple task and finish groups, not just this one.
Okay, thank you very much for that input. If there's nothing else, then we'll end the proceedings for tonight. So thank you very much, and we'll return in the next civic year. So, thank you. Oh yes, sorry. Before we go, we need to briefly resolve to go below the line.
If there's any comments.
If any, because there was an exempt set of minutes that were appended to the back here.
If there are no comments on the exempt minutes, if you're happy to resolve them, we won't need to go into the exempt session to discuss something if you don't need to discuss it.
If people are happy with the green papers, then I'll sign those as well. Then. Yeah. Yeah, well, yes, thank you for reminding me of that, yes. It's unfortunate that Councillor Manning's not able to be with us tonight, but he has been an exemplary member of the Scrutiny Committee in terms of his forensic analysis with his questioning, so we will certainly miss his presence. Thank you.